Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador, for that great introduction. Thank you all. The RJC plays such a constructive role in electing Republicans, and they will play a constructive role in electing the next President of the United States. It is an honor for me to be here. Before we start, I thought it would be appropriate to maybe pause just for a brief moment in reflection and prayer for the family members that lost loved ones in San Bernardino, if you don't mind. Thank you. This Sunday is the start of the Holiday of Light. And in a world of deep, disturbing darkness, starting on Sunday, there will be a light shining for hope and possibilities and opportunity. First and foremost, I want to wish you all a happy Hanukkah. We are living in really serious, dangerous times, and I think it requires serious leadership, proven leadership, to be able to deal with the challenges that we face and, in fact, the opportunities that we face as a nation. In recent times, unless you're just not watching what's going on, we see tragedy after tragedy take place. In Paris, in Tunisia, in Lebanon, a U.S. American student at yeshiva was murdered in the West Bank, Ezra Schwartz. The brutal savagery of Islamic terrorism exists. And this president and his former Secretary of State cannot call it for what it is. It is Islamic terrorism that wants to destroy our way of life, wants to attack our freedom. They have declared war on us, and we need to declare war on them. In foreign policy, the differences can't be any more stark than the mainstream views of our party and those of the Democrats. The Obama-Clinton-Kerry team has gotten it wrong from day one. First, let me say that I don't think a president should speak with grandiosity without backing it up. Should I be President of the United States, there won't be any red lines unless it's backed up. We're not going to call ISIS the JV team unless we're serious about taking them out. No more grandiose reset buttons and then never following it up and allowing for Putin to run wild while we pull back. Our weakness creates voids, and those voids are filled now with asymmetric threats of terror and nation states that no longer think the United States is willing to expend the capital necessary to be a serious leader. And whether it's Libya, where Hillary Clinton literally said that this was a version of smart power at its finest, and then we saw the tragedy of Benghazi take place, and now we have 3 or 4 different militias, including an ISIS-related terrorist group that is now trying to destabilize Tunisia. Across the spectrum of the Middle East, because we have pulled back, we're now in a far worse place. 3 months ago, I went to the Reagan Library to lay out a plan to destroy ISIS, not to contain it, but to destroy it. And that's exactly what we need to do, and only American leadership will make that happen. What I said then is what I believe today, that we need a no-fly zone. And for those that are worried, well, Russia won't like that, Russia should be a little more worried about what we do rather than we being worried about what they do. We should create safe zones. I know people are deeply concerned about the refugee problems that exist with 4 million Syrians that are uprooted from their families, a tragedy of untold hardship for so many people. But the simple fact is, the way to deal with the refugee problem is to create safe zones there while we build an army with our support and our leadership that will take on ISIS and create a political settlement where Assad goes to wherever, someplace outside of Syria where we can create stability. We need more special forces. We need to arm the Kurds. We need to re-engage with the Sunni tribal leaders. We need to re-engage with the Sunni tribal leaders that were our partners when we built a fragile but secure Iraq the day that Barack Obama was elected. And he and his Secretary of State abandoned that. That created the void. They both admit now that Al-Qaeda in Iraq was wiped out. In its place now we have a caliphate the size of Indiana. 30,000 battle-tested terrorists that are organizing each and every day to create hardship for Europe, for the United States, and for the Middle East. We can have a plan, but it's going to require American leadership. The only way the Arab world will join forces if they believe that the United States is serious in providing the leadership that will happen. This administration is not serious. When they put restrictions on the warfighters, by having, for example, 75% of the sorties that are going out from our air bases, 75% go back with the munitions not launched. It's because you have to get approval from a lawyer in the Department of Defense before you do this. We don't have the intelligence capabilities, we don't have the will, and incrementally we're getting into a bigger mess. The next President of the United States is going to have to be a commander-in-chief that asks the military for options not to contain, but to destroy ISIS. Only American leadership could make that happen, and frankly, only American leadership can improve the chances of dealing with the other force of instability in the region, which is an aggressive Iran, now possibly emboldened with billions and billions of dollars this agreement, this horrible agreement, is going to give them. The radical regime in Tehran has to be confronted as well. I believe we're going to have to end up building the sanctions regime again. We're going to have to do this because they will continue to provide support as the largest supporter of terrorism in the world. The United States, when we pull back, creates so much uncertainty that it will come to our shore. We have to be engaged in this in a meaningful way. And our friends need to know that we have their back. The simple fact is today, our allies no longer believe the United States is serious, that we'll be there, that we'll have their back, that the treaty obligations that we have are meaningful anymore. And the first place to start that relationship is to restore the ruptured relationship with Israel. That has to be the first step. And the best way to do that is on day one to announce the next president, and should I be president, I will do this, that will move the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. And on day one, we will create a memorandum, extend the memorandum of understanding to provide U.S. security assistance over the long haul for Israel. It is important to make sure that we have that Israel has the qualitative military edge in the neighborhood to make sure that there is an environment of peace through strength. And we can do that in short order. On day one, we would make it clear that there will be no pressure from the United States on Israel as it relates to negotiating with the Palestinians until the Palestinian Authority and other entities inside of the political realm inside of the Palestinian Authority recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state with secure borders. There has to be a recognition by the next President of the United States that there's no moral equivalence between acts of terror against innocent people in Israel and Israel's efforts to create an environment of self-defense. On day one, I will work with the next Attorney General to stop the BDS movement in the United States, to use whatever resources that exist. A Bush administration will forcefully restore America's leadership in the world in other ways as well. Our national security should be the first imperative of a foreign policy, for sure. But we also have, I believe, a duty to provide support for people that are oppressed. That religious freedom continues to be a value in this country that we need to protect here and protect overseas. Whether it's the Yazidis or the Christians in Iraq or Syria, or Jews that are being discriminated against in Europe or the United States, the next President of the United States needs to recognize that religious freedom is one of the first freedoms of this country. And whether it's here, inside our borders, or outside, but for us who? Who but the United States will stand for the discriminated, the oppressed? And sadly, that discrimination now is taking place across the United States college campuses as well. The political correctness of our country needs to be shattered. Universities should be a place of free expression. These growing cases of anti-Semitic behavior by a few, supported by professors and administrators in some cases, they're not taking action, has to stop. And the President of the United States has the authority in many ways to convene, has the bully pulpit to make sure that people know that at least one person, the leader of the free world, will be on the side of people who only want to act on their religious beliefs. It is a first freedom that I believe should be protected. My relationship with Israel goes way back. I've been to Israel 5 times, and every time I go, I'm inspired by the people, by the sense of purpose of the place, by the energy that exists, by the creativity, by the fact that there's everybody talks about the Republican Party being kind of a wild and crazy place these days. Go see how Israeli politics works. We have 65 candidates running for president. They have 65 separate parties running for the Knesset. I'm inspired by Israel. And from the minute I moved to Miami, where I had a chance to meet my friends Ron Krongold and Glenda Krongold, and took my first trip for Israeli bonds, and then took the other 4 trips for other reasons, I see Israel as an important ally in so many ways. And I've been engaged in the fight long before being a candidate for president. Whether it was the purchase of Israeli bonds through the Florida Pension Fund, or assisting people that brought to my dad's attention the plight of Ethiopian Jews, an effort that didn't get much publicity, but thousands and thousands of people were saved because of George H.W. Bush. My involvement has been consistent, it has been clear. And here's my pledge to you. As President of the United States, I will restore America's leadership in the world. We're living in perilous times, but there are also times of extraordinary opportunity. This is a time where if we fix a few big, complex things, we will be living in times of abundance. But in order to get to that point where we grow our economy at a far faster rate, where people are lifted out of poverty, where the middle class gets a pay raise for the first time in 15 years, we have to accept the fact that only America can lead the free world. Only America can create the conditions in partnership with the rest of our allies to create peace and security. And then we can get on with the business of becoming an economic superpower again and inspiring the rest of the world. I know we can do this, but here's the question for you all, and the question for all voters. Who has the right stuff? Who has the experience that you can look back in the past and know that going forward, that they have the ideas and the leadership skills to be able to solve these big, complex problems and lead? Who has a heart for people? This is not about the big personalities on the stage, as much as a couple of the candidates would like it to be that way. This is about people that are really struggling, people that are really scared about what the future looks like. This is about the American people. And the next president of the United States better have a servant's heart, rather than trying to push people down to make himself look better. That's what we need. We need servant leadership, a person with a heart, a person with a brain, and a person with a backbone. I think you're looking at the next Republican nominee. And here's what I promise to you. Should I win this nomination, I will take it to Hillary Clinton and I will whoop her. Because I will campaign with a hopeful, optimistic message, with my arms wide open, encouraging people to come towards our cause, campaigning in places where Republicans haven't been in a long while, and challenging the notion that somehow the left has a monopoly on compassion, when in fact, we've now seen what the last 7 years looks like as it relates to policies that are holding people back. It's time to restore American greatness by applying conservative principles in a way that draws people towards our cause. And that's my mission, and I hope you'll join it. God bless you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Governor, we have about 13 minutes for some Q&A.
6 seconds.
You touched on this a little bit in your remarks. I just want to ask you this to get you squarely on the record on this. But in 2004, your brother wrote a letter to Prime Minister Sharon codifying the U.S. position that, one, Israel won't be forced to return to the 67 borders, two, that the Palestinians would not have any right of return, and three, Israel's existence as a Jewish state would be non-negotiable. Upon taking office, President Obama and Hillary Clinton rejected this letter. As president, will you reinstate the terms of this letter and make it official U.S. policy again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Look, let me just add, I find it troubling that Secretary Kerry, I've not heard President Obama speak about this directly, but I find it really troubling that even when we have this extraordinary threat of ISIS and Islamic terrorism, which should be the first priority of this administration, he continues to hold out hope that he can impose a solution on Israel. It's mind-blowing, to be honest with you, that they have such a warped view of how this works, or this is legacy building. And in fact, what we need to do is to create the conditions where there is a willing partner in negotiation. You can't force this. If the Palestinian Authority hadn't had an election in how many years now? In a decade? They're not the legitimate elected regime. They can't speak for the Palestinian people. They continue to incite their young people by in their schools. There has to be a completely different kind of environment for serious negotiations to take place, and we should not impose that on Israel.
We've seen recently the U.S. engaging directly and indirectly in regime change, the fall of Saddam, Gaddafi, Mubarak. As president, where would you engage U.S. power for regime change, and how do you strike a balance between human rights and stability in a region?
Well, first of all, I think it has to be in our national security interest. There has to be a clear and compelling interest. It can't be based simply on the brutality of the regime. It has to be based on, is this the best interest for our country, first and foremost, and our allies? And then we need to have a clear strategy. I think the lessons learned of the last 20 years is if you don't have a clear strategy of how to get in and win with compelling force and how to get out, you got problems. And so the lessons, I think, are Libya being a good example of this. If you're serious about regime change and it's in our national security interest, you better have a policy that's not just, all right, we got rid of Gaddafi and then leave, because the net result now is that Libya now has become a greater threat to the region, and perhaps ultimately over the long haul a threat to our own country. So there has to be a significant strategy for the completion of the mission. And then I think we should do this wherever possible in partnership with the neighborhood and with our partners. I don't believe that we should, unless there is only this one option, we should be unilaterally taking countries over, unless there's literally no other way to do it. It works far better when we do this in partnership with our allies.
I know this is an area of expertise for you as well. It's a little bit afield from what we're talking about here, but how would your administration deal differently in the Obama administration with the regional challenges as it relates to Latin and Central America as well, which is our big problem?
Well, we wouldn't ignore Latin America, which has been a common problem, made worse, I think, in this administration, but across the board, to be honest with you. Look, we have national security challenges on our border that need to be recognized. You have the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, where a majority of the immigrants that are crossing the border now come from those countries because there is a lack of attention to economic progress, to the criminality that exists, to the drug trafficking. We have to be engaged. The best example of a partnership that worked was the Proyecto Gran Colombiano, the Grand Colombian Project, I think it was called, that when President Uribe was president and my brother and Congress funded these programs, and it was extraordinarily successful. We didn't unilaterally impose anything. We did this in partnership with a courageous, democratically elected leader, and it brought stability and economic growth to Colombia. Similarly, we should have something like that as it relates to the Northern Triangle countries, and we need to be engaged. This Sunday, there's an election in Venezuela. Venezuela is on the verge of being an ungovernable state that could create national security problems for our country. Hezbollah is active in Latin America. And we sit back and we say, well, you know, if someone gets elected president and then they steal all the democratic institutions in the country, that somehow we shouldn't be concerned about that? Well, we should be, because ultimately this is going to create national security problems for us.
Well, you went right where I was trying to get you to go, because I was trying to lead you to the water. But so the challenge is, you know, Iran and—
Did I get there?
You did get there.
Okay,
so Iran and Hezbollah in Latin America, you know, do you think this is a real problem?
It is a threat. No, it's not. This is not conjecture. This is, you know, the intelligence reports are verifying the fact that they're engaged in Venezuela, they're engaged in Argentina, they're engaged in Central America, for sure, and embedded in the Lebanese and Syrian populations that long ago moved to those countries. This is a real challenge for us.
Right. I know that there's been some discussion in the past regarding Jim Baker as an advisor to you, and you've been very clear about that. Can you share with the group, however, about, and I know you're not going to name somebody now, but some of the kinds of people you could see as a Secretary of State in your administration?
I can't. I hadn't. Man, that's a little ambitious for me. I'm going to win New Hampshire first. How about that?
How about what you're looking for in a Secretary of State?
You know, someone who has great skill. One of the problems in this administration, I think, is that the White House has way too much power. Everything is looked at through a political lens. The National Security Council has doubled in size in the last 25 years. I think if you put men and women of real talent and real expertise in the Department of Defense and Department of State, you can create a much better, more robust foreign policy. The President has to create the clear direction on this, but you would pick people of talent that wouldn't be subjugated to some little whippersnapper political hack. I mean, if you look at the NSC, they're run by people that actually were part of the campaign. That would not happen in a Bush administration. These would be people that were talented, that had the capability to you know, forge consensus in places where there might be disagreement. There would be an ample chance to be able to think things through. One of the things I've learned in my life now that I'm 62 is I don't have every answer. I know what I don't know. I apologize for everybody on that regard. If you don't have the humility to be able to know what you don't know, you're going to be a horrible president. We got one right now.
Share with us a little bit about your thoughts on—
By the way, just as it relates to the Baker question,
yeah.
The person I rely on the most as it relates to U.S.-Israeli policy is my brother. I thought I could get an applause line out of that. That was.
I didn't know Neil knew that much about Israel policy.
I got a damn good brother.
Yes, you do. And we all love him, so we do. Take a step back and think globally, if you would, for a second. If you were the president of the last 4 years, how different would the world be today?
Wow, what a tough question. First of all, we wouldn't have had Obamacare, which is the greatest job killer. We wouldn't have had a stimulus, which was all this pent-up progressive liberal demand that was just waiting for the chance to have a liberal president with a Democrat-controlled Congress. We would have focused on traditional ways to jumpstart the economy. Remember the shovel-ready projects? They actually do work if there were any around, but we spent $800 billion just basically fulfilling the idyllic notion of what the progressive left thinks is the right thing to do rather than a bottom-up approach. We would reform the tax code rather than create higher taxes. We would have never created the regulatory environment that right now stifles capital investing that creates, ultimately is the only way to create high-wage jobs. We would have celebrated the success of American entrepreneurialism in the energy sector. This is one of the great success stories of all time. Hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, for those worried about the climate, by the way, is the reason why we've had a 10% reduction in carbon emissions, not anything from the Department of Energy and their venture capital arm. That didn't work. But a bottom-up approach where you unleash American entrepreneurialism on any challenge creates more prosperity, more benefits, more jump-starting of the economy than any program from Washington, D.C. We would be growing at a far faster rate, and median disposable income would be growing today rather than $2,300 down from the day that Barack Obama was elected. And we would not have 6 million people stuck in poverty more than the day that he got elected. And people would think their children and grandchildren would have more opportunities than what they believe today. And we would be the leader of the free world, which is not what we are today.
That's right.
And we wouldn't have had sequester to gut the military, to now make it harder for the next president of the United States to be an able commander-in-chief, because we don't have the resources that we need to be truly the most effective fighting force possible.
Well, that leads me to another question, which is your nickname is Vito Corleone. What would you do about sequester? How would you get the budget and the debt under control while rebuilding the military? Without having a line item veto like you had in Florida.
Well, you do have a line item veto, a version of it. You could have Paul Ryan has actually suggested a rescission version of it, which would be an indirect version of a line item veto, where you would go back to Congress and there could be a 30-day period where they could do an up or down vote of whether they would take the cut or not. But you got to get engaged with the Congress. This notion that somehow you don't talk to, Barack Obama has no relationship, no conversation with any Republican. The gap is so wide today because every day, another day goes by, and he's always blaming the Republicans, pushing them down and making himself look better. We need to get back to regular order work. Just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that they're evil. It just means they're wrong, right? I mean, so why not assume bad, don't assume bad motives. The motives are irrelevant. We have to start making our democracy work again. And passing a budget that's based on the priorities of a forged consensus has to be the first priority. We haven't passed a budget in how long? 6 years? Not going to work.
And so these are questions that were submitted in advance by our members. The number one question we got out of all of them from people across the country is, how's your mom and dad?
They're doing fine. My dad is 91 and he can't walk anymore. He's in a wheelchair, but he stopped watching the CSI series shows, all those shows, just kind of, not really engaged. He's now watching Fox again, throwing shoes, and trying to figure out Donald Trump. I think that's his main goal in life. It's hard for a guy like that to understand the Trump phenomenon, but he's doing well. My mother's an angel, believe it or not. Much as we give her grief, she is in great space. She's just phenomenal. For those that have to deal with their caregivers these days, and the sandwich generation, there are a lot of us. My mom is the best caregiver in the world for her love of her life. They've been married almost 71 years.
Wow. Well, on behalf of the RJC, thank you for coming, but also please give your parents our love and your brother and the Bush family. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.